Trump puts out his opening up America again plan, but Democrats are setting a trap for him. We'll give you the details on that. Plus, the lockdown is loosening as people are refusing to comply in more and more places. Tell you about the aircraft carrier experiment that we're seeing underway. China underestimates deaths by at least 50%. Reid versus Ford. Biden gets sleepy again. And should you dress up for work from home? Coming up.
This is not campaigning. I want to make the country better. I don't care about campaigning. This is about making our country better.
Welcome to the Buck Sexton Show, everybody. This is about making the country better. This show is the Trump administration's plan to reopen America is. But that doesn't mean that everybody agrees. Doesn't mean everybody will come along on that ride. There are people who have other ideas, other objections, other plans in mind. We'll get through some of those today. But the big news yesterday evening, when many of you were probably listening to this show, perhaps, was the drop of the phases, the 3 phases for opening up America again. A little bit of a play on "Make America Great Again" there, I think, or at least hearkening back to that language. So we have the guidelines. They are out. Like I said, it goes in phases. It's exactly what you would expect. They have proposed criteria, symptoms, cases, hospitals, and you have to satisfy the criteria before you go to a phased opening. And it's downward trajectory of influenza-like illnesses for a 14-day period and downward trajectory of COVID-like syndromic cases in a 14-day period, downward trajectory of documented cases, treat all patients without crisis care, and robust testing in place for healthcare workers. So a lot of places are going to already really have that, and so they can go into phase 1. And other places, New York is going to be a bit delayed, but other places are going to have to take a bit more time to get there. I think everything in this plan that was unveiled is sensible. I think it's fair-minded, and I think it's serious. I have no objection to it. I'm not saying it's perfect, and there's clearly going to be some stop-start with all of this, but we'll have to see how quickly different states implement it. And it goes into the state's responsibilities for this. It has guidelines for employers, goes into phase 1. And I'm just trying to give you the overview of this, because then we're going to talk about the objections to it, what the latest data tells us about what we've been told about this disease, and the balancing of risk that's going to happen. That we are now finally accepting as a society what I've known for weeks, but I've been less vocal about, certainly on Twitter, because I don't need the lib piranhas to come after me unnecessarily. We're going to have to find a way to push through this and live through this. There is no stay in the bunker until everything is fine and there's no risk from this disease. That's not in our future. That's not even possible because of the risks we would run to the economy and the damage that we would do to ourselves if we tried that approach. And for a lot of you in parts of the country that have very minimal cases of this so far, that does seem completely insane. And it's understandable that would seem crazy to you. Why would your state shut down with these extreme measures when the numbers simply do not justify it? And even in the worst hit places in the country, New York, Detroit, New Orleans, New Jersey, northern New Jersey, even in those areas, the numbers haven't been as bad as what were projected even a few weeks ago. So the good news is we're in a better place than we had anticipated. The bad news is this is going to go on. When I say this, I mean our fight against the virus is going to go on a lot longer than a lot of people, I think, currently realize. We have to establish a path forward, which is what these guidelines are trying to do, a path forward that allows us to take sensible precaution, mitigate risk, but also live more of our lives. Stay home and hide under the bed is not a long-term solution for anything. We all know that. So here's phase 1. Vulnerable individuals continue to shelter in place. When in public, People should maximize physical distance, limit social settings to less than 10 people, avoid socializing of groups of more than 10 people. Yeah, minimize non-essential travel. And then for employers, encourage telework, close common areas, minimize non-essential travel, strongly consider special accommodations for vulnerable population. Remember, vulnerable population is the focus of all of this. We're going to have to come up with even more robust measures to protect nursing homes, to protect retirement communities, to make sure that anybody who is older, even within a family, if they're living in a multi-generational household, are able to be protected, that they, that there's going to be a lot. And there's also going to have to be a lot of work from us as a society to make sure that folks who are continuing to do a greater degree of precaution for a longer period of time don't feel even more isolated, don't feel like, well, now people are forgetting about what they're going through. So we have to make sure that we're constantly supporting neighbors, friends, loved ones, family members who are in that vulnerable population, getting them food, getting them the medicine they need, and making them feel as included in this process of beating the virus as possible, because they will be carrying a heavy burden by being shut down or in lockdown the longest based on these guidelines. So for employers, pretty straightforward. I told you phase 2, remember, if you go 14 days without a spike in cases, and 14 days seems to be this is the benchmark we're using for everything right now. Phase 2, vulnerable individuals still shelter in place. In public, maximize physical distance. Don't group with more than 50 people. Non-essential travel can resume. Phase 2, employers continue to encourage telework, close common areas. Non-essential travel can resume. Special accommodations. Schools and organized activities can reopen. Still no visits to senior care facilities. No visits to hospitals. Large venues can operate under moderate physical distancing protocols. Elective surgeries can resume. Gyms can remain open if they adhere to physical distancing and sanitation protocols. Bars may operate with diminished standing room occupancy where applicable. So phase 2 starts to get a lot closer. Remember, we're trying to get into phase 1 in the next month in most places. Maybe some will start in the next couple of weeks, but it'll be really about 3-4 weeks. You'll see phase 1 operations in more and more states across the country. And we got to see how that goes. Then we're going to get to phase 2. And then phase 3, vulnerable individuals can resume public interactions, but should still practice some physical distancing. Low-risk populations should minimize time in crowded environments. Work sites go back to unrestricted staffing. You can start to have senior care facilities and hospitals getting visits. Large venues operate under physical distancing standards. Gyms open if they have sanitation protocols in place. Bars with limited standing room capacity. And there you have it, friends. That's it. That's a roadmap. That's a plan. Now we have something to work with. Now we have something to work off of. We have benchmarks in place. We have a way to look at our future and make decisions that are not, oh my gosh, we're all going to die, or oh my gosh, we're just going to stay in lockdown and the economy is going to explode and that's okay because we're all going to die otherwise. No, that will not be the approach. That's not how the American people are going to view this. And I think we're making some real progress. This is when we are finally starting to, as a society, I think, come to grips with the trade-offs that are inherent in dealing with a situation like this. Everyone got very scared, and there was a panic a couple of weeks ago, really 3-4 weeks ago, where even talk of trade-offs was elevated to like discussion of murder. How could you? Blood on your hands. Don't you care about the vulnerable? Don't you care about the sick? Yeah, we care about everybody. We're trying to make the best decisions that we can under the circumstances. And so that's why I think it's important that we take this moment to recognize that we're in a position now where there's the opening to have a real adult conversation about how the future goes, and the administration is pushing us all in that direction. Now, it is still going to be open to the states. I'm hearing and seeing some analysis out there, people saying, well, the president can force under the Interstate Commerce Clause. That's not going to happen. And also, I don't think as conservatives we should embrace the usage of the Interstate Commerce Clause to try to twist the arms of state governments. We're usually the Wickard v. Filburn was overreach and bad and led to terrible federal government Leviathan growth, right? That's usually what we're, as conservatives. So we shouldn't go in the other direction now and say, no, the president should be unduly twisting arms of states, of governors to make them go faster. Here's what's going to twist the arms of governors to go faster. Some states will go through these guidelines and will move relatively quickly. They'll move expeditiously to get as reopened as they can, as safely as they can, and start to see the benefits for their economy and also from the people. People are going to start non-complying by the millions. We're already seeing this. Not just that protest in Michigan, in Lansing, but also you're just look at photos that are circulating of major roadways in the Los Angeles area full of cars. People are saying, no, I'm sorry, we're going to start moving around and start doing stuff again. So better to put everybody on a framework or within a framework where they can make decisions and understand, all right, look, if we have a setback, we know what to do. We have a game plan. This is how you deal with an evolving enemy. This is how you deal with a dynamic challenge, which is what the fight against this virus is. Now, this is where the politics are going to come in. Of course, the way the Democrats are setting this up, the way that Nancy Pelosi and others are talking about this, anything that happens that's bad after May 1st will be somehow blamed on Donald Trump. There'll be blood on his hands. It'll be as though he ordered mass executions of people, even though the other recognition that has finally seeped into people's minds is flattening the curve doesn't mean the virus goes away. In fact, there are some, and they're not very popular with this analysis, but there are some who say that we may end up suffering over the next 6 to 9 months the same total number of infections in 9 months that we might have suffered in, say, 3 or 4 months as a nation, and that most people in the country will actually end up getting this or being exposed to it, I should say, at some point. So flattening the curve doesn't mean, okay, it's gone. It means we get it to a point where we think it's manageable. Manageable means there still will be cases. If there are cases, there will be hospitalizations, and there'll be a percentage of hospitalizations that result in people dying. And it's terrible and it's tragic, but this is the world that we're living in. There is no other world. There is no way around this. So that's what forces the real discussion about what are sensible and fair trade-offs, what's real risk mitigation or risk mitigation. Risk mitigation, what does it look like? How do we do it? And now we have that framework in place to make the right decisions, I think. And it will be done state by state. Now, Pelosi and the rest are going to blame Trump no matter what, but we can't stop that from bringing us to start reopening parts of the economy. And we'll also be testing out the theory that lockdowns were that the extreme lockdown we went into across the country, where 90% of people plus effectively stayed in their homes with the exception of just getting food, that extreme lockdown, we'll see if that really had the massive suppressive effect, or if a less extreme lockdown would have also been able to suppress the virus without anywhere near the economic damage. And this is important, and it's not just a political issue. It's important to understand what's true because we may face this again. There may be a major second wave of this virus at some point. So we should know what tools that have been used were effective and what tools were either overhyped or pushed for political reasons. Look across Europe. The major lockdowns didn't end up with better outcomes. The major lockdown countries have not had better outcomes in general than the minimal lockdown country of Sweden. Pretty much the only one that's done that. But that's the results speak for themselves thus far. And I would like someone to start looking at, well, why is that? Why did we have to go into lockdown? If the story we're going to be told is that the spread had already happened, I'd want to know how. Well, at what point does that spread stop then? When can we assume that this will actually be a problem that won't just have a massive resurgence? So anyway, we've got what has to happen now, but the devil's always in the details, as you know. Reopening will be fraught with risk. There's risk built into it. There is no perfect future. There's no great idea here that gets us out of all of this. But now finally, I think we have a return to sober adult conversation about what this nation and what each state needs to do. And the president deserves credit for pushing this forward when politically the safer thing to do would be to say, I don't even know. Let's just let the governors figure it out. We'll help them as we can, but I want to leave this to each individual state and see what ends up happening. I mean, here's a prediction. Texas, Governor Abbott is going to reopen for business relatively quickly. This is what I think will happen. We'll reopen soon, matter of a couple of weeks. Not all business, but a substantial portion. And Texas will go on, and Texas will be fine. So that will be a big signal, won't it? This will show us that it is possible to continue to live life in a greater sense, in more of life, even while this virus is out there. That in and of itself is going to be a hopeful moment when we all start to see that happen.
The New York pause policies, the close down policies, will be extended in coordination with other states to May 15th. I don't want to project beyond that period. That's about 1 month. 1 month is a long time. People need certainty and clarity so they can plan. I need a coordinated action plan with the other states. So 1 month, we'll continue the close down policies. What happens after then, I don't know. Now,
this was frustrating. I'm here in New York, and it feels like the extension of this at this point for another month. Look, these are all tough calls. I think that we do need to get used to you got to become comfortable with the discomfort of not having all the answers on this stuff. I know there are people out there, whether they're on radio shows or whatever, they've always got the answer. Nobody has all the answers on this stuff. I was just talking to an infectious disease specialist this morning. He's saying, I keep sending him this data that's coming out about remdesivir and about hydroxychloroquine and now the serology testing that's come out of Stanford University. And he keeps trying to tell me, and we keep going through this game. He goes, look, it's encouraging. Here are the following issues with the data. Here's why we can't be excited about it yet. And each time I have this moment of, come on. It feels like progress is so hard to come by with these therapeutics. And so that's why I look, Governor CUOMO, on normal times, I think the guy's a Democrat machine politician and a buffoon. He has been bad on the preparation in New York, no question. Been a little better on the handling, and although there has been some hyperbole and he's been off on some things. But I try to remind myself, there are no great answers. There aren't even really good answers. There's just the least bad answer. All right, team, as promised, Congressman Jim Jordan from Ohio joins us now to talk about everything we need to ask the man. Hey, Congressman, thanks so much.
You bet. Good to be with you, bud.
All right, so let's start. I want to get into FISA reform, OD&I, all that stuff. But first, the reopening state by state. The president's put out the guidance as of yesterday.
Yeah.
What do you think about this nationwide? And then drill down on how it affects your home state of Ohio.
No, I think it's great. Remember the president said like 3.5 weeks ago, the cure can't be worse than the disease. The cure can't be worse than the problem. So this is a serious problem. We all understand that, and we got to deal with it. But we also got to get our economy up and running. And I think the president is right, laying out this three phase. But let's get people back to work. And you see this, particularly you've seen a number of demonstrations across the Midwest where people are saying, wait a minute, let's enough of this attack on freedom, enough of this staying closed down. Let's get back to work, and let's do it sooner rather than later. So I am all for it. The guidelines I think they laid out and the sort of the phased-in approach to it all, I think make just good common sense, and I think that's what the American people see as well.
What are your expectations for Ohio in this process?
Well, our governor tweeted out yesterday, which I thought was a great sign, that he plans on sticking to the May 1st, but people going back to work on May 1st. Now, I know details. And as the president said yesterday in his press conference, he hopes that some of this can happen even before May 1st, which is sort of the date that he had, the White House had set as well. So that's my attitude. Look, let's go ASAP. And frankly, one of the things I think would be really helpful is for Congress to set the example. Why in the world aren't we in session? We got all these task forces working in the White House and several there and around the country. But the task force that's supposed to address big issues that confront our nation is the United States Congress. And we've been missing in action. So, Speaker Pelosi, where's your plan? You said, well, we think we're going to come back on May 4th. Well, others are working right now. Truckers are trucking produce and goods and services and supplies. Grocery store people are stacking shelves, and frontline workers in the healthcare system and our law enforcement, they're all working. Why can't the U.S. Congress get back to work and deal with some of the issues that are critical to this virus concern and other business that we should be taking care of?
And the delay that happened once before from the Democrat side on getting the Paycheck Protection Program up and running, we're now facing another delay. I've heard Democrats say they need more data. Well, we know they're running out of money. Is there an argument here that is even good faith, or is this just cynical politics, Congressman?
No, it's politics, and everyone knows it. This is the same group of people who wanted the Green New Deal and the CARES Act. This is the same group of people who got money for the Kennedy Center in the CARES Act. This is the same group of people. Jerry Nadler introduced a bill a couple weeks ago which said we should pay states to let criminals out during the coronavirus. Think about that. We're going to pay people to let the bad guys go? That might be one of the dumbest ideas I have ever heard, but they're saying, the coronavirus requires us to do this, and we think this is necessary, and so let's pay states for this, use American taxpayer dollars to say, okay, we're going to let more bad guys out of prison. So we know what this is. Let's just fund the Paycheck Protection Program, which is a program that was necessary because government told businesses you can't operate your business. And we have to help small business owners and families get through this. It's almost like a takings. When you take people's property or livelihood, you got to compensate them for it. So governments did that. So let's get this program the funds it needs to help the small business owners and families across this country and not play politics.
All right, switching gears here for a moment to a story that under more normal circumstances would have, I think, been mind-blowing for a lot of folks, or perhaps expected, but still upsetting. And that's the most recent information that we have from the declassified footnotes of the Inspector General Horowitz report. Now we actually see more of what was in that report. And it turns out that there are some areas where the FBI has even less wiggle room to make this seem like anything other than a political attack. The whole Russia collusion investigation, the origins of this, the beginnings of Crossfire Hurricane. Congressman, you've been following this all along, and you've been fighting to try to get more truth and transparency in this process. Is there going to be accountability at the FBI and in the intelligence community for those who were clearly abusing authority?
Yeah, let's hope so. You're right. They clearly were. I mean, for a number of us who've been on this issue for several years now, the only thing we had wrong is it was worse than we thought. Because now we know that the FBI got played by Christopher Steele. The Russians were giving Christopher Steele disinformation. And worse yet, the FBI knew it was taking place, but they didn't care. They didn't care because they were so determined to get this president that they launched an investigation on this president before he was even president, went and spied on 2 American citizens associated with the president's campaign, and have been after the president ever since then. So this is as bad as it gets. And remember, it was about 1 year ago this month, maybe 13 months ago. Bill Barr, new attorney general at the time, testified in front of Congress, and he said there was a failure of leadership at the upper echelon of the FBI. But it was worse than that. It wasn't just that Comey, McCabe, Baker, Strzok, Page, the people who ran the Clinton investigation, then ran the Trump-Russia Crossfire Hurricane investigation. It wasn't just that there was a failure of leadership. There was a blatant and intentional disregard for the truth. They knew that the Russians were playing Steele. They knew Steele was getting played. They knew the dossier was BS. But they didn't care because they wanted to get this president. And that's how bad this was.
What are you still trying to find out in all of this? I mean, I had Congressman Nunes on recently, and he alluded to there being a big next act coming here. We know that the Durham investigation is still ongoing. The U.S. Attorney from Connecticut and Attorney General Barr are all over this. And Barr's comments recently show that he already smells a rat in this whole process, but he's just not telling us the details. What are you looking to still find out? What do we have to know before we finally come to the end of this?
Well, I think 2 things. One is, you're right. Let's see what Mr. Durham turns up in his investigating, and I hope that there are going to be people held accountable, and maybe even in indictments. But the second thing is, never forget what Horowitz told us a week and a half ago. He said it was more than just the Carter-Page FISA that there were problems with. Horowitz is doing a broader look. The Inspector General of the Justice Department is doing a broader look at all the FISA process, the entire FISA process. He did a random sample of 29 FISA applications, 29 American citizens who were being spied on, and he found in every single one there were major problems, particularly what they call the Woods file, the file that underlying evidence to support what is taken to the FISA court. He found in 29 that there were problems with Woods file, and in 4 of the 29 applications, they couldn't even find a Woods file. They didn't even have it, which is a standard the FBI has for itself. So the FBI didn't follow their own standard, knew they weren't following their own standard, and did nothing to correct the fact that they weren't following the standard that they had set. That's how bad this is. So there's the Durham investigation. There's this overall FISA concern. That is all what we should be having hearings on, but we're not back in Congress to even do what we're supposed to be doing.
When do you think you're going to be back?
I want to go back like ASAP. Pelosi has said May 4th, which is ridiculous. People are working, like as we said earlier, and more people are going to go back to work before that date, but somehow Congress isn't. That is completely ridiculous. So I hope we go back next week or the week after and start doing the work of the American people.
And what's your biggest focus going to be once you're back? Obviously, again, we'll make sure that we get the PPP extended with more funding for that. But what else do you want to see happen?
2 things should happen. I'm on the Judiciary Committee, and I'm a ranking member of the Judiciary Committee and still serving as ranking member of the Oversight Committee. So on oversight, we should be looking at the World Health Organization. What better thing to have oversight of now than the organization that lied to the world, specifically lied to the American people, and we're the biggest funders of that organization. So we should be doing oversight hearings on the World Health Organization, how bad things really are at that institution. Then in the Judiciary Committee, we should be looking at the threats to liberty. Bill Barr did a great memo 3 days ago, where he indicated that, if you can go to the grocery store and maintain 6-foot social distancing and take care of your shopping there, you should certainly be able to go to church on Sunday and not have people harass you if you're going to maintain the same kind of distance standards there. That was a great win for religious liberty, that memo he put out. So we should be having hearings in the committee most responsible for protecting your fundamental liberties. That committee, the House Judiciary Committee, should be having hearings on what's happening around the country where these governors and local officials are restricting people's fundamental rights.
And just one more for you, Congressman. If, in fact, as you said, you're on judiciary, if there is really clear evidence of criminal abuse that comes up, going back to the FISA situation for a moment, are you confident that people will be prosecuted?
I do. If they can prove it, and it's there, if the evidence and supporting evidence is there, I think you will see Bill Barr and John Durham do that. We'll have to wait and see. But one other thing that should happen, when we go back, the fact that Jerry Nadler has not had Michael Horowitz, the Inspector General of the Justice Department, come in and do a hearing in front of the Judiciary Committee on what took place at the FISA court is ridiculous. We already have. December, he issued his report on Carter-Page. We've yet to have a hearing on where Mr. Horowitz can come in and answer our questions and be there so the American people can see it. And now with the memo he put out a week and a half ago, more reason for him to come in for a hearing. So that's the other thing we should be doing in Judiciary Committee as well.
All right, Congressman Jim Jordan of Ohio, everybody. Congressman, really appreciate you making the time. Stay safe, and thanks for your work.
You too, Buck. Thank you. Take care.
As these new and better testing solutions come online, we're seeing this additional capacity reflected in the numbers. For this reason, the number of tests processed in commercial laboratories has dropped from approximately 100,000 to roughly 75,000 tests over the last week. The reason it dropped is because we have so many other tests and we don't even have to go through the laboratories. But the laboratories have tremendous additional capacity, and states feel free to use that capacity. Some in the media falsely reported this as a bad thing, when in fact it is a great thing, because it indicates that the states are moving to faster, more local testing solutions, including on-the-spot tests.
Testing. We've been told all along that's very, very important. I think it's easy to say how important that is without really getting into the situation of what kind of testing, for what, how fast, where. There's a lot of additional information you need. Yes, we need to be able to test clearly for the virus. We also need serology tests, but how effective are they, and how quickly are we getting them up, and where will they be available, and are you subjecting people to the possibility of COVID-19 infection, COVID-19 infection from showing up at a testing site, right? That's another big issue. That's been a big problem in hospitals. This is where you have, in part, I think, the concerns over nosocomial infection, which we talk about here on the show, hospital-based infection spread. If you have everyone showing up to an ER who thinks they have COVID-19 in a certain area, guess what? If you show up and you don't have it, well, now you're in the ER full of people with COVID-19. It's very bad. So that's why they've tried to set up these drive-through testing sites and all the rest of it. On the serology testing, which I think is a very big, important piece of this for a couple of reasons, right? Remember, serology test looks for antibodies. Antibodies tell you if you've already been subjected to, if you've already been exposed to the virus at some level. So looking at the serology testing would give us some sense, first and foremost, about what the mortality rate of this really is. And that's where I want to talk to you also about this aircraft carrier, because now it's a little bit like the Princess Cruise vessel, which is a contained environment where we saw you introduce this virus into a contained environment that's very susceptible for the spread of this. What are you facing? How bad does it get? What are the numbers? Now, the Princess Cruise line, you're dealing with a particularly older and less healthy than the general population group. But with the aircraft carrier, you're dealing with a healthier and younger than the general population group. And so we have some numbers on that I will get to. But on the antibody testing side, big study just came out. Stanford University, I believe, did this one in Santa Clara County, California. They sampled 3,300 people. And it turns out that according to the serology test that they have, the number of actual cases versus the number of believed cases, based on the serology test, if you extrapolate it out, 50 to 80 times more people have been exposed to and gotten an immune response from COVID-19 than the actual listed cases. That's enormous. Now, that doesn't get us to perfect herd immunity and everything. And people use herd immunity a little loosely these days. Herd immunity at its apex, at its best, would be 90+% of the population already has had this and has lasting immunity. And therefore, the spread of this, because it would be so limited, only 1 in 10 people who would come into contact with somebody would be susceptible to this. It would just not, it's like the virus runs out of a room to run, right? We're nowhere near that. We're not going to be anywhere near that, I think, anytime soon. But even if we are at, say, let's say 10 to 20% of the population, certainly the population of densely populated, some of these words keep coming up, densely populated parts of the country, well, that would then mean that you have, let's say, a fifth of people in New York, Los Angeles, who, if they were tested, would find out that at least for the next year, they keep saying maybe the immunity is limited duration, fine. At least for the next year, though, which would be a big deal, right? Because we might have a vaccine in a year, give or take, and better therapeutics. You wouldn't have to worry. So you'd be able to go out, do work, do what you got to do. And this is where we get into the serology identity card, or whatever they're going to call it. Sort of passport to COVID-19 immunity, which I know people are pushing back on very understandably, but this is where these ideas come from. So this is, in a sense, encouraging. We want the number of exposed up to this point that we don't know about and that were asymptomatic or had very low symptoms and didn't realize what they had. We want that number to be as high as possible. If we could find out that 20 to 30% of America already has antibodies to this disease, that would be great news. Great news. Not, okay, we're out of the woods news, but it would really be helpful. If we find out that, 2 to 3% of the population has been exposed to this, or 2 to 3% even in the areas with the worst virus exposure so far, then that's bad news. Then that means that we got the climb up through the slow rise to herd immunity is going to be really slow and really brutal and really painful for our society. All right. I also got to tell you something. A friend of mine who's really an infectious disease wizard. He's an epidemiologist of over 30 years is what he does. He reached out to me because I sent this to him, this study, and he says, yes, but it's good. It's encouraging, the Santa Clara study. Downside is that the serology tests right now may be picking up a lot of other coronaviruses as false positives here in terms of the antibodies, because guess what the common cold is? A coronavirus, a type of coronavirus. How many cold viruses are out there? Hundreds. So that's I got to bring you all the facts as I know them on all the indicators. That's the more, that's the this is not the good news that we're hoping for necessarily, but it could still be very promising.